Under the scorching sun of the frontier, where dust clung to every breath and silence was broken only by the restless wind, a scene unfolded that no one in that small town would ever forget. The rancher, a man once feared for his strength, now struggled with trembling hands that could barely hold the reins of his own horse. His sons, young and proud, laughed at him as if his weakness were a joke, their voices echoing across the corral like cruel reminders of time's merciless passage. They believed his days of glory were buried under years of labor, and all that remained was a fragile shadow of the man he used to be. But destiny has a way of turning scorn into silence. That same morning, a boy appeared, dirty, barefoot, and carrying the look of someone who had long wrestled with hunger and loneliness. No one knew his name, nor where he came from. He was just another homeless wanderer passing through the ranch lands, his thin frame hardly promising strength. The rancher's son smirked, certain that such a boy could never be of use to anyone. Yet the story that followed would shatter their pride and mark the beginning of a lesson they would carry for the rest of their lives. The moment came when the rancher tried to lift a heavy sack of grain. His hands quivered, his body bent, and the son's mocking laughter grew sharper, slicing into his dignity. It was then that the boy stepped forward. With no hesitation, he bent his back, wrapped his arms around the load, and rose as though the weight were nothing but a feather. Silence fell instantly, the laughter dying in their throats as disbelief turned their faces pale. The homeless boy, whom they had dismissed as nothing, stood taller than all of them in that single act. There was something almost biblical in the air, as if the desert itself had stopped to witness the truth. Strength was not in appearances, nor in the arrogance of youth, but in the fire forged by suffering, endurance, and will. The rancher's sons stared in awe, their pride crumbling like sand in the wind. For the first time, they saw in their father's frailty not shame, but the weight of sacrifice, and in the boy's hands not mere strength, but the silent echo of survival. And so the story begins, not with guns drawn or horses charging across the plains, but with a simple act that carried the weight of eternity. A man once mocked for his weakness, sons blinded by arrogance, and a boy with nothing but scars of hardship to his name. This was not just another tale from the Old West. It was a reminder that true strength often wears the face of the forgotten. A story that would burn itself into memory, demanding to be told until the last embers of the frontier faded into history. The rancher's sons, still stunned by what they had witnessed, exchanged uneasy glances. Their laughter, once filled with arrogance, now seemed childish in the shadow of the boy's unexpected strength. The air around them grew heavier, as though the land itself demanded silence. Their father, weary and humiliated, lifted his gaze not to his sons, but to the boy who carried the sack with quiet determination. In that moment, something unspoken passed between the two, a recognition that hardship forged bonds stronger than blood or pride. The boy did not seek applause or recognition. His steps were steady, his eyes lowered, as though lifting the load had been nothing more than a simple act of survival. Yet those who watched could not ignore the quiet power he embodied. The rancher's eldest son, known for his brute force, clenched his fists as if the sight had carved into his pride. He had always been the one praised for his strength, and now a nameless wanderer had stripped him of that crown without a single word. The rancher's hands trembled as he rested them against the fence, his thoughts clouded by memories of days long gone. He remembered when his own youth had commanded respect, when his grip was steady and his back unyielding. But age had taken its toll, leaving him vulnerable before his own children. The boy's simple act was not only a display of strength, it was a mirror reflecting what the rancher once was and what his sons had yet to understand. A tension began to weave itself into the rancher's household. The sons, driven by wounded pride, looked upon the boy with suspicion. Who was he to arrive uninvited and turn their world upside down? Yet beneath their jealousy lingered a gnawing curiosity. They could not reconcile the image of a ragged boy with the impossible strength they had just witnessed. Every fiber of their being demanded an answer, though none dared to ask. As the day stretched on, whispers spread among the ranch hands. Stories of the boy's strength reached every corner of the ranch, and even those hardened by years of labor raised their brows in disbelief. The Old West was a land where reputation was currency, and the boy had earned his without a single boast. He carried not only the sack but the weight of mystery, and that mystery was far heavier than any burden of grain. That night, the ranch house stood under a sky filled with stars, their glow scattered like embers across the endless black. Around the dinner table, the atmosphere was tense. The sons poked at their plates in silence, their fathers staring at the flames in the hearth. The boy sat at the far end, quiet and reserved, as though he did not belong. Yet his presence could not be ignored. Every glance in his direction carried both resentment and reluctant respect. The eldest son broke the silence with a sneer. "Strength means nothing if it belongs to a beggar," he said, his voice sharp enough to draw blood. His brothers chuckled nervously, clinging to the last remnants of their pride. But the rancher remained still, his eyes fixed on the boy, who lifted his head slowly and looked back with a calmness that unsettled everyone at the table. It was not defiance. It was something deeper, something unyielding. The boy's voice, when it came, was soft but steady. He spoke of hunger, of nights spent under the cold desert sky, and of carrying burdens heavier than sacks of grain, burdens of survival, loneliness, and loss. His words painted a world the sons had never known, a world where strength was not measured in muscles, but in the will to keep walking when the earth itself seemed to conspire against you. Silence returned to the table, but it was no longer tense. It was haunted. The rancher leaned back in his chair, his weathered face etched with both pain and pride. In the boy, he saw not just strength but resilience, the very quality that had once allowed him to carve a life out of unforgiving land. His sons had been born in a comfort compared to the struggles he had faced, and now he feared that luxury had dulled their spirit. The boy's presence was a cruel reminder that true strength often blooms in the soil of suffering. Outside, the wind howled against the wooden walls, carrying with it the scent of dust and wild sage. The Old West was not kind to the weak, and the rancher knew it well. As he looked at his sons, restless, uneasy, and silent, he wondered if the boy's arrival was mere chance or something greater. Perhaps the frontier itself had delivered him as a test, a lesson that could only be taught by one who had already been broken and reforged by the merciless hand of survival. The following morning, the ranch stirred with the usual rhythm of chores, the clatter of hooves, the creak of leather saddles, and the low murmur of cattle drifting across the fields. Yet something was different. The ranch hands, who once treated the boy as a shadow passing through, now watched him with cautious respect. They noticed how he rose before dawn, carrying buckets of water with ease, hauling firewood without complaint, and working as though his very life depended on each task. The sons, meanwhile, observed in silence, their pride shrinking with every effortless movement he made. The eldest son, unable to bear it, challenged the boy in front of everyone. He dragged out a heavy log, thick and gnarled, something even seasoned ranch hands struggled to move. "Let's see if you can lift this," he mocked, his voice dripping with disdain. The ranch hands leaned in, eager to witness the spectacle. The boy, with no words, bent down, braced himself, and with a steady breath, lifted the log as though it were nothing more than a child's toy. Gasps filled the air, followed by an unsettling quiet that pressed upon every heart. Humiliation burned on the eldest son's face, but what stung more was the absence of arrogance in the boy's eyes. There was no gloating, no triumph, only the same calm determination as before. That humility cut deeper than any boast could have. It revealed a truth the eldest son did not want to face, that strength without compassion was hollow, and pride without humility was weakness in disguise. The rancher, who had witnessed it all, felt a storm of emotions. He had hoped his sons would one day inherit not just his land, but his grit, his will, and his respect for the unforgiving soil. Yet the boy, an outsider with nothing, already carried those qualities in his heart. It was as though life itself had carved them into his very bones. For the first time, the rancher wondered if the blood that flowed in his veins meant less than the spirit forged in struggle. That day, whispers spread far beyond the ranch. Cowboys passing through carried the tale of the nameless boy who lifted more than men twice his size, and the legend began to grow. In the Old West, stories traveled faster than horses, and soon the boy's quiet strength would echo across towns and saloons, sparking curiosity and envy in equal measure. The sons, once the pride of the ranch, now lived under the shadow of someone they had mocked only days before. As dusk settled and painted the sky in shades of crimson and gold, the rancher sat on the porch, his weathered eyes fixed on the horizon. The boy joined him in silence, carrying 2 tin cups filled with water. They drank without speaking, the weight of unspoken truths hanging between them. Finally, the rancher broke the silence, his voice low and gravelly. "You remind me of myself, many years ago," he said. The boy did not respond, but his eyes softened, acknowledging the words without pride. Inside the house, the sons watched through the window, bitterness gnawing at them like a wolf at the door. It was not only the boy's strength that tormented them, it was the bond forming between him and their father. They had never seen their father's eyes shine with such recognition, not even when they themselves achieved their small victories. Jealousy grew into resentment, and resentment into quiet rage. The eldest clenched his jaw, already plotting how to reclaim the honor he believed was his by birthright. That night, around the campfire, the ranch hands spoke in hushed tones. Some claimed the boy was not ordinary, that perhaps he was destined for something greater, that fate itself had sent him. Others whispered that no man carried such strength without a price, and they feared what kind of past had shaped him. The Old West was filled with men running from shadows, and in the boy's silence, they sensed a history too heavy to speak aloud. Meanwhile, the boy lay awake under the stars, his body still and his mind restless. Memories of his journey flickered through him. Faces lost to hunger, nights of cold so bitter it cut through bone, and the relentless march of survival that had forced him to grow stronger than he ever wished to be. He had not come to the ranch seeking glory or belonging. Yet now, caught in the storm of envy and admiration, he felt the weight of eyes upon him, eyes that saw not the pain behind his strength, but only the marvel of it. As the fire died down and the night deepened, the ranch itself seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere in the darkness, wolves howled, their cries carrying across the plains like a warning. Change was coming, and with it, the fragile balance of pride, power, and truth would be tested. The boy, unknowingly, had become the spark that would ignite it all. The days that followed tested the fragile peace of the ranch. Each morning, the boy carried out the grueling tasks with a silent endurance that unsettled the sons. He mended fences under the burning sun, hauled water from distant wells, and carried supplies across the barren fields as though each load were lighter than air. His quiet resilience drew the admiration of the ranch hands, who began to follow his example, working harder, grumbling less. To them, the boy was no longer just a wanderer. He was a living reminder of how strength came not from privilege, but from the crucible of hardship. The eldest son's bitterness grew with every passing day. He sought moments to challenge the boy, to strip him of the respect he had earned so quickly. But no matter what task he devised, the boy carried it out without hesitation or complaint. His humility became a mirror that reflected the eldest son's arrogance, and that reflection was unbearable. The son began to feel not like a leader, but like a child still learning the weight of the world. His pride cracked under the strain, though he refused to admit it. The rancher, however, watched with keen eyes. He saw how the boy's presence reshaped the spirit of his household and his land. There was a fire in the boy that his own sons had never carried, and it troubled him deeply. He had provided his children with food, shelter, and safety. Yet in doing so, had he robbed them of the very struggles that forged character? His heart ached as he wondered whether his legacy was slipping away, not into the hands of his sons, but into the calloused palms of a stranger. The middle son, unlike his eldest brother, wrestled with curiosity rather than rage. At night, he lingered near the boy, hoping to hear more of his past. But the boy rarely spoke, and when he did, his words were fragments of pain, half-told stories of hunger, wandering, and loss. Each revelation unsettled the middle son, who had never known life beyond the comfort of their ranch walls. Slowly, respect began to grow in him, though it was tangled with guilt and unease. One evening, as the sun sank and the cattle lowed in the distance, The boy stood at the corral, staring at the horizon. His silhouette was outlined in gold, like a figure etched into the land itself. The rancher joined him, placing a weary hand on his shoulder. Neither spoke, but in that silence, the boy felt something he had long been denied. A place where he was not invisible, not mocked, not forgotten. Yet he also sensed the storm brewing within the family, a storm that no amount of strength could hold back forever. The storm broke in subtle ways at first. The eldest son began to sow seeds of doubt among the ranch hands, whispering that the boy's strength was unnatural, that no human carried such burdens without secrets hidden in the dark. Some men nodded uneasily, recalling the mysteries that seemed to surround him. Others dismissed it, pointing to his humility and tireless labor. But whispers have power on the frontier, where fear grows faster than crops in dry soil. One afternoon, the eldest son confronted the boy outright. Before the corral, with the cattle restless and the ranch hands gathered, he hurled an accusation. A man does not walk into a ranch with nothing and claim respect he hasn't earned, he spat. The boy, calm as ever, did not answer. Instead, he lifted another heavy load, a stack of lumber meant for repairing the barn, and carried it across the yard. He did not boast, did not defend himself. His silence stung sharper than words, for it revealed the emptiness of the eldest son's pride. The rancher stepped forward, his voice heavy with authority. "Respect is not given, it is proven," he said, his eyes locked on his son. "And this boy has proven more in days than some men do in a lifetime." The eldest son's face flushed with fury, humiliated not just by the boy, but by his own father. The moment carved a deeper rift into the family, one that would not easily heal. That night, under the flickering glow of the fire, the boy finally spoke more of his past. He told of nights without shelter, of carrying his dying mother across miles of desert in search of water, of burying her beneath a lonely tree when her strength gave out. His voice did not tremble, but those listening felt the weight of his grief settle over them like a heavy shroud. For the first time, the sons glimpsed the truth. His strength was not a gift, but the scar of endless loss. Silence fell after his words, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of coyotes. The rancher lowered his head, tears welling in eyes that had not wept in years. The sons shifted uncomfortably, their arrogance pierced by a truth too raw to ignore. And though none spoke it aloud, each of them felt it. The boy, who had arrived as nothing, carried within him a strength forged by suffering that no man could match, not even the proud sons of the ranch. The following days were heavy with unease. The eldest son avoided the boy, his pride wounded beyond repair, while the middle son lingered closer, drawn by the quiet dignity the boy carried. The youngest, still impressionable and eager to prove himself, watched the boy with wide eyes, torn between loyalty to his brothers and admiration for the stranger. Around the ranch, whispers no longer carried malice but awe, as men began to speak of the boy not as a beggar, but as a figure touched by destiny. One evening, as the cattle were being herded back from the plains, a storm rolled in without warning. Lightning cracked the horizon, thunder roared across the sky, and chaos erupted among the herd. The animals scattered, wild with fear, trampling fences and threatening to crush anything in their path. The ranch hands struggled to bring them under control, shouting and cracking whips to no avail. It was the kind of storm that tested not only skill, but courage. Without hesitation, the boy plunged into the chaos. His movements were swift and sure, weaving between the terrified animals with a grace that stunned those watching. He grabbed a stray calf, lifting it out of danger with ease, and guided the panicked herd toward safety, his voice steady even against the thunder's roar. The rancher's sons, frozen at first, followed reluctantly, driven by shame as much as fear. Side by side, they fought to bring the herd under control, but it was the boy who led, his presence commanding the trust of beasts and men alike. When the storm finally broke and the herd settled, silence lingered in its wake. The boy stood drenched in rain, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion, while the rancher's sons stood behind him, their pride fractured further still. The rancher approached, laying a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Strength isn't just in the body," he said, his voice carrying over the hushed crowd. "It's in the heart that refuses to break, no matter the storm." His words sank deep, burning into the hearts of his sons more sharply than any rebuke. That night, as the rain still tapped against the windows, the ranch felt different. The boy had proven himself not with words or defiance, but with action in the face of danger. The ranch hands spoke of him with reverence, while the sons sat in silence, each wrestling with their own pride. Something had shifted in the air, as though the storm had not only cleansed the land, but stripped away the illusions that had long blinded them. The eldest son, however, could not let go of his bitterness. His heart was a battlefield where envy warred against respect, and respect was losing ground. One night, he cornered the boy near the barn, his voice low and venomous. "You think you belong here," he hissed, "but you never will. This ranch is ours, and you'll never be more than a stray dog feeding off what isn't yours." The boy met his gaze with calm eyes, saying nothing, and the silence was more unbearable than any retort. The middle son, overhearing the confrontation, stepped forward. For the first time, he defended the boy. "He's done more for this ranch in a week than you have in years," he declared, his voice trembling but resolute. The words cut like a blade, leaving the eldest son stunned and furious. For the first time, the loyalty of his brothers was not his to command, and the ground beneath him felt as though it were crumbling away. Tension thickened in the household. The rancher, aware of the growing fracture between his sons, struggled with despair. He had dreamed of leaving behind not just his land, but a legacy of unity and strength. Now he feared his children would inherit nothing but division and pride. He watched the boy work with humility and endurance, and in the quiet of his heart, a dangerous thought took root. Perhaps the ranch would survive not through his bloodline, but through the hands of a boy who had carried burdens greater than any of his sons. The youngest son, caught between loyalty and admiration, began to drift closer to the boy. He followed him through the fields, learning the rhythm of labor, the quiet strength of persistence. He saw in the boy not just power, but a patience and kindness his brothers lacked. Slowly, he began to change, his arrogance softening, his heart opening to lessons he had never learned from his own kin. Yet the eldest son's rage festered in silence, growing darker by the day. He felt not only replaced, but erased, and in his desperation, he began to plot. The Old West was a land where pride could destroy men faster than bullets, and the fire burning in his chest threatened to consume everything around him. The boy, unknowingly, had become both the hope of the ranch and the spark of a storm yet to come. The days stretched into weeks, and the ranch seemed to bend beneath the tension. The boy's quiet strength had won the respect of the ranch hands and the admiration of the youngest son, but it had also carved a canyon between the brothers. The eldest son wore his resentment like armor, his every glance sharp with hostility. The middle son, though torn, found himself drifting toward the boy's example, unable to ignore the truth of what he had seen. And the rancher, caught in the middle, bore the weight of a father who feared his legacy might be shattered by his own children's pride. One morning, before the sun had fully risen, the eldest son led his brothers into the fields. His voice was harsh, laced with bitterness. "We will not be outshone by a beggar," he said, his fists clenched. He proposed a trial of strength, one that would either humble the boy or expose him as something unnatural. The middle son hesitated, but the youngest, eager to prove his loyalty, reluctantly followed. Pride is a dangerous fire, and that morning it burned hot in their hearts. When the boy arrived, the challenge was waiting. The eldest dragged out a massive boulder from the edge of the field, a stone so heavy it had long been left untouched. With a smirk, he dared the boy to lift it, declaring that no man who could not move it was worthy of their respect. The ranch hands gathered, their faces tense with anticipation. The rancher stood in silence, his heart aching with both fear and curiosity. The boy stepped forward. He placed his hands on a rough surface, closed his eyes, and for a long moment, simply breathed. Then, with a steady exhale, he lifted. His muscles strained, veins rose beneath his skin, but slowly, impossibly, the boulder shifted. Gasps erupted as the stone rose from the ground, carried in the boy's arms as though lifted by something greater than flesh alone. He walked a few paces, lowered it gently, and stepped back, his face calm despite the effort. The silence that followed was deafening. The ranch hands stood in awe, the middle and youngest sons frozen with disbelief. But the eldest son's eyes burned with a fury deeper than before. Instead of humbling him, the sight fanned his rage into something darker. He no longer saw the boy as human, but as a threat, a shadow cast over his birthright. Pride had blinded him completely, and in that blindness, he began to consider not just rivalry, but ruin. The rancher knew the danger in his eldest son's eyes. He had seen it before, in men driven by envy, in rivals consumed by bitterness. It was the same poison that had torn families apart and left graves scattered across the frontier. That evening, he spoke quietly to the boy, warning him of the storm gathering under his own roof. The boy only nodded, his face solemn. "I have faced storms before," he said simply. "If it comes, I will not run." The rancher's heart broke at the calm certainty in those words. Around the campfire, the ranch hands whispered about the day's events. Some spoke of the boy as if he were more legend than flesh, a figure destined to rise above the dust of the plains. Others feared what his presence might bring, sensing the eldest son's growing hatred. In the Old West, stories had power, and now the boy's story was one of strength, humility, and a mystery that no man could unravel. It was a tale that drew admiration, but also envy, a dangerous mix on land already burdened with pride. The middle son wrestled with his conscience. He could no longer deny the boy's worth, yet his loyalty to his brother weighed heavily on him. At night, he lay awake, torn between the truth he had witnessed and the blood bond that tied him to a man blinded by rage. The youngest, meanwhile, had already chosen his path. He shadowed the boy, learning from his labor, his patience, and his quiet resilience. For him, the boy had become more than a wanderer. He was a mentor, a living example of the strength that comes from sacrifice. But the eldest son could not be swayed. Each act of humility from a boy was another wound to his pride. Each whisper of respect, another reminder of his fading place. His hatred grew sharper, his plans darker. He began to speak of driving the boy out, of proving that no stranger could ever take what belonged to his family. Yet beneath his threats lurked something more dangerous, a desperation that could ignite violence, the kind that left scars not only on land but on souls. And so the ranch became a powder keg, silent but volatile, waiting for the spark that would set it ablaze. The boy, with his quiet strength and haunted past, had become both the savior and the thread of the household. The rancher knew it, the sons felt it, and the land itself seemed to hold its breath. In the Old West, stories often ended in blood, but this one was still being written, etched in the silence before the storm. In the end, the ranch was left with more than fences mended or cattle herded. It was left with a truth that cut deeper than any storm or quarrel. Strength was never about the size of one's hands or the weight one could lift. It was about the courage to endure, the humility to act without seeking glory, and the resilience to rise again after life had stripped everything away. The boy, who had come with nothing but scars and silence, carried within him a lesson the West itself had been whispering all along. True greatness is often hidden beneath dust, hunger, and forgotten names. The rancher's sons, each in their own way, stood at the crossroads of pride and humility. They had mocked weakness, only to see strength revealed in places they never thought to look. Their father, weary yet wise, saw in them the chance to change, to trade arrogance for respect, selfishness for courage. Whether they seized that chance or let it slip through their fingers was a choice that would shape not only their inheritance, but the very soul of their family. The boy had lit a fire that could either forge them or consume them. The boy himself did not seek to be a savior or rival. He had carried burdens heavier than stone, survived storms harsher than thunder, and his heart carried the quiet dignity of one who knew suffering intimately. His story was not told through words, but through the weight he bore and the silence he kept. And in that silence, everyone around him found a mirror, forcing them to confront what they had long ignored about themselves. The Old West was not kind, but it was fair, and it revealed men for who they truly were. As the sun set over the plains, painting the horizon with fire and shadow, the ranch stood still, its people forever changed. The tale of the rancher's trembling hands, the laughter of his sons, and the nameless boy who carried the load would echo across the land, not as a story of strength alone, but as a reminder of humility, endurance, and the hidden power of the forgotten. It was a story that belonged not to one ranch, but to every man and woman who ever learned that true strength is born where pride breaks and the heart endures. If this story moved you, if it stirred something deep within your own heart, let it live beyond these words. Share your thoughts in the comments. Let others feel the weight of this lesson, and join us by subscribing to the channel for more stories that touch the soul. And if this tale left you reflecting long after the final word, leave your mark with a like, because in every story told, and in every voice that listens, we find the strength to carry the load together.